Back again. Good morning, Rockets.
Daniel, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
That's good to hear.
How are you? Because you're under enormous pressure in your job as local footy coach on the weekend. You went into this game winless as coach after round one.
Thank you, Daniel.
You had a win.
Yes, we did.
The mighty Bowen Tigers.
The Bowen Tigers up and about. It was great conditions, as you imagine, there at Cherry Road.
Now, normally you're in the confines of a beautiful coach's box.
That was mentioned to me by the players before the game. How are you going to be with that? So I was rugged up, T-shirt, polo, hoodie, coat, umbrella, hat.
Sounds like how I used to play. I used to try and find as many layers as possible. I was a wimp. But Rocket, I reckon they renowned round 4. The AFL loves a themed round, to blowout round. There's some big losses over the weekend. What was the most disappointing one for you?
As I say, the biggest loser from the weekend.
We're a positive group, but it was a bad round for some.
We are a positive group, but we are a reality group too,
yes.
Jimmy. So 6 of the 9 were 8 goals or more. Obviously a couple of 80 points. I think the biggest loser was Melbourne for me. The 3 teams that got flogged, Brisbane, Carlton, the Suns, well, they're going to have to be in the bottom 6. So with all due respects, we can pick them apart, but they're at various stages of development, age, whatever the case may be. And that's going to happen to them. But for me, Melbourne, touted as top 8. Probably internally as well, they've said that we'll make the finals, and maybe people talk about top 4. And I thought the way they capitulated after quarter time was very disappointing. If I was a Melbourne supporter, and if I was a Melbourne match committee, I'd have some worries. Can
that have, and this is to all of you, can that have deep scarring on a group, the way that they capitulated? For 2 reasons. One, that the damage it does to its own confidence, but also what other clubs notice when they see something like that happen?
I think it's more the second point. I think internally they'll bounce back, because it's proven with every team except the bottom teams. There's probably 2 or 3 in a row. It's going to happen through lack of talent in many ways. But I think we'll see a response. Melbourne have done that in the past. They were actually see a response. We asked last week about stocks, where we're going to buy Melbourne and where we'll hold. My biggest concern for them was, and they haven't played except for Geelong round 1, and they probably could have if maybe won. They haven't played a team in a round where they're going to fight for the 8 or a top 4 team. My biggest concern was, when it became hard, were they going to miss Jack Viney? And to me, it was answered yesterday. They didn't have anyone that stood up there. They lost their structure. They dominated first quarter. They should have been 3 or 4 up. They weren't efficient going forward. And once the ball went into their defensive 50, they looked fumbly and they looked panicky. And that Hawthorn really just hung in there. But as we know, the Hawks, they persevered and actually towed them.
Jimmy, do you think that can have a big impact on their season?
Well, it's a failed hurdle, really, for them, because when we saw Richmond win the flag last year, they got over a few hurdles which they hadn't done in a while. They beat Geelong, which Geelong have owned them for recent years. They won interstate. They had some fantastic wins, and you need to do that as far as your progression to get to a top 4 side. To be a really good side, you've got to get over those, call it little mental demons. Hawthorn have owned Melbourne. That's 15 out of the last 16 games. That's dominance over one side, and they failed. And the thing for me is, I don't know whether, and Rocket, you can talk to this a lot more than I can, whether they're a really literal group. It seemed to me they had this game plan all week, and then the conditions were completely different from what you planned, and they didn't make any adjustments. So they were still starting at a centre bounce 10 metres in front of their opponent in the pouring rain. How many goals were kicked out of the goal square where they were beaten out the back in skiddy conditions? They just made no adjustments. Even their own defence, they finally put the spare man back, but he was far too close. In the wet conditions, you can be further back and come up at the ball. Oh, it was time. They got goals scored against them in the exact same way over and over again. There was no adjustment, mate.
Yeah, I would have thought there'd have to be nearly 8 goals that were scored within 15 metres of the goals, which is horrible, really. I mean, you should be able to get them through for a point. You should be able to have a bounce. You should be able to clear it sideways for a boundary throw, whatever the case may be. But they were really fumbling. That was mentioned earlier. They were really jittery in that sort of part of the ground, and those small forwards of Hawthorn really put them under pressure.
You said yesterday, while you put a tweet out about streaks of goals being kicked against Melbourne. Hawks had 10 in a row, I think, yesterday.
Yeah, it was 10 in a row.
Might have 15 is the last 16 or 16 of the last 17 goals for the match. I mean, if you're in the coach's box and you can't stop that, you've got problems, haven't you, Rocket?
Yeah, you have. It was interesting earlier. They dominated around the stoppages. They dominated in congestion. The contested balls up. Inside 50s was up.
Yeah.
And whether that and not being able to put it on the score, but they had 5 goals, I suppose, first quarter. But they allowed Hawthorn to kick 3, and they shouldn't have. So they should have had 4 or 5 goal break. I think maybe you talk about scarring. I don't think scarring is the right word, but I think that scoreboard pressure, or lack of scoreboard pressure from all what they were able to do. And then the game turned on its head. Slowly but surely, Hawthorn turned that around. And after half-time, Hawthorn dominated the stoppages. They dominated clearances. They dominated contested ball and the inside 50. They must have had nearly 15 more in the last quarter.
Yeah, it was a complete domination. So to go
17-9. It was +8 in the last quarter.
Close.
To go to what I was, what you were referring to, Half, in round 1, they let 4 goals go in a row against the Cats when they had control of the game. Against Brisbane, they let in 7 in a row.
Yeah.
That was round 2 when they nearly lost it at the end. Against North Melbourne, they let in the first 4. So that's setting the tone, the way the game's to be played. They let North Melbourne kick the first 4, and then 10 in a row against Hawthorn. Now, Simon Goodwin said that it wasn't really a problem. That's just the way the game's played, that it's a game of momentum, and that sort of thing happens across the competition. But when it's costing you the way it's costing Melbourne, surely something has to change.
Yeah, and I think Jimmy said before that they didn't change a lot, and they've got the system. Sometimes they'll start a 7th or an 8th, 2 off the back end. And when the game starts to go against them, they keep that, but their forwards come up further, and all of a sudden, and they didn't allow that the first quarter, and they got out over the back through mistakes of some individuals, but eventually they lost their forward structure. So Hawthorn who were the best at it, be able to set up behind the footy, and they were having 3 loose in a sort of a V shape, and they just didn't allow. And then Melbourne became frustrated, especially with the wet ball, couldn't connect, went wide. Then they lose their structure completely. So you end up losing your mental application of what the plan is, and individuals actually go kick chasing, and that's certainly where it fell down.
And I think Nathan Jones's job on Tom Mitchell was pretty
First
serviceable.
class,
But you got to give credit to Mitchell. He realised he wasn't going to get those extra ones away from the stoppage, and just went closer to the contest. He had 13 clearances.
Yeah.
And that helped enormously because big Max Gawn, RSN's own Max Gawn, dominated the hitouts. He had 68, but they got beaten by clearances by 17. So structurally,
and that's where structurally you can work it out. And it's the same people are querying. Sorry to digress. We'll come back to Melbourne, but actually querying Hinkley, but they're not really losing the stoppages that well. So you can have a non-dominant ruckman and still do okay at the stoppages. So that that can be a furphy. I think Max Gawn missed another goal in the first quarter.
He did, yep.
Which from the same spot, probably an easier shot.
He's coming in tomorrow. We're going to ask him about that.
And the Garlett missed a snap, which from about 15 out. Tom Bugg, with all due respect, they've got to change. Now, Tom Bugg gives everything he's got, but he can't kick. He can't kick. He turned the ball over, missed shots. So eventually, that lack of scoreboard pressure I talk about, with all the effort, chips away at the confidence of the players.
Can we explore that a little bit more? Because it happened to St Kilda also early in the game where, not for the first time this year, they've had control of the match and just missed easy shots. What's your view on the amount of goal-kicking practice you can do at training, and who has ultimate say? Is it the phys editors or is it the coach to say, no, this is such an important part of the game, we miss too many goals, and like a golf swing, you've just got to keep doing more and more until you get it right?
I agree. I think you've got to practice. I think what happens is twofold. Sports science probably trying to justify the job. I must admit, the last 2 guys that I've been involved with have said, well, it's the trade and you've got to do it as much as you can, so it's up to you. So they didn't overrule that, which is good. I think also players practice from the boundary and round the body, and Stevie J started it, and dribble kicks, and the players are fantastic. They're better than ever been, but they're worse at set shots because they don't have a routine. They tend to come in on an arc. They miss goals, which they should kick. So it could be mental, and it certainly can be technique and routine. And I think from a long time ago, so this is probably not applicable today, used to be the full forward. And a full forward would kick 100 goals. So he kicked the bulk of them, kicked 30% or whatever it is. Now it's shared around, and I don't think we practice enough of the set shots.
Because I thought it was interesting, Half, that so much work is done on stoppages and running patterns and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you can't put it through the big sticks, it all means nothing.
Well, it sucks the life out of your group as well when you're getting the opportunities and you keep missing. That's the other thing, the psychological effect it has.
I think it's the most important stat. People ask me what's the most important stat. I reckon kicking is generally, and I think goal kicking is most. If you can have 25 shots a goal and you kick 19-6, it's better than 12-13, and it keeps you in the game or gives you a chance to win.
Yeah.
And if you can take your chances, it's worth gold. That's why we talked about Menzel the other week. Kicking goals, it's worth its weight in gold.
And I think you nailed a great point there, Whitey, with a lot of these young sides who got belted. It's all the technicality of the game. You can get your head confused of structure and where I've got to be when the game's stopped, but that's only still 5% of the game. Really, when you think about it, it's the fundamentals of the game. Look, fumbling when the ball's near you, missing targets, not kicking it to advantage, set shot conversion. If you're running at 45%, which the Doggies are this year, the worst conversion, it costs you games.
But it's interesting, like in the Essendon-Port Adelaide game earlier on in the day, when James Stewart's got the ball in his hand for a set shot inside 40, you expect him to kick it. When Joe Danaher gets the ball inside 40, you expect him to miss it. Yet Joe Danaher's paid probably $800,000 a year and James Stewart's paid $250,000 a year. Now, I know Joe gets it more than James, but when James Stewart has it in his hands, he's a good shot at goal. And I don't think there's enough around the competition that you can bank on to actually kick it when it's their opportunity.
Well, we'll move on from this one after the break. Before we do that, just on the Hawks, is it the benefit of experience to be able to cope with that first quarter onslaught and say, right, we'll just stay the course here. We know what we're trying to do. We've got the forward half pressure situation on our terms when it gets there, and eventually the game will get back into our terms. And did you think the Hawks were able to do what they did yesterday against a team like Melbourne?
I think your first point's right. I think the experience of the leading group, they've been through it before. They'd know that they'll be able to stick to what they know that works, and they tried a few different things as well. They tinkered a little bit. I thought their defenders initially were out of position, but they were smart enough to put enough pressure on the Melbourne guys. I didn't think that the Hawthorn would win by 8-9 goals at the start of the game. I thought it'd be tight. Probably I rated Melbourne a bit higher. I thought it was a game that Melbourne really had to have a good showing against a team that they'd be fighting with for a final 8 spot. They're the teams, not so much the top 4, but certainly those teams from 5 to 12. That they're the teams that A, you got to win, and B, you don't want to get blown out of the park. So I thought the Hawks would probably win by a couple of goals, but I didn't think by that.
And just want to highlight Ben Stratton. I know we pick all Australian teams and all the hype and I guess the plaudits go to the guys who make that, and we fall in love with defenders who just rack up getting the footy, but they don't defend. So we get blown away. Oh, he's had 30, he's had 40, but yet he's probably had 3 or 4 kicked on him, or he's just down there stating up. But his ability to play on tall, smalls, and the way he structures up Hawthorn's defence, he should get more credit, and that's what I look for in a lot of defenders.
No doubt his ability to be back out in the park for Hawthorn this year.
So important.
It makes a massive difference to the way they structure up. What does it tell you and reinforce to you more, and you've probably had this in your head for a long time now, that so much of it is purely psychology? Yeah,
I think we spoke about that last week, about teams that are about back. I think now it's showing that competition's more even than we've ever thought. Have a look at Collingwood beating Adelaide. So you've got to bring, I hate the cliches, but the A-grade mental game. You've got to be on song. That's why Hawthorn and Sydney have done it consistently, and Geelong. You've just got to keep backing up. It's what you're paid for. 2.5 hours of mental application. Certainly the last 2 weeks, Essendon were off song. I think last week, I'm just guessing, but I reckon the players read how bad the Bulldogs were rather than how good they were. It's about, we'll win. We'll turn up and we'll win. And you just can't do it. Like, it surprised me. Keep going back to it. After round 1, Carlton got a few accolades for why they played some daring footy. Still lost reasonably easily. And Mark Murphy, after the Gold Coast Suns game the next week, said, we got comfortable, we got ahead of ourselves. They lost the week before, but but him saying that means that the group thought they were just going to win. Yeah. They just had to turn up and win. You're not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Richmond at the weekend were ruthless. They just played their way and eventually smashed the team. But you've got to bring your effort. And that should be a non-negotiable. As a coach, you coach effort, but you shouldn't have to coach effort. It should be there. It should be driven by the leader. It should be inherent in them. But if you've got to coach effort, then if effort's there, then you can coach your style and your tactics and all those sorts of things.
It was interesting, Jimmy, that Rocket talked to us about this time last week about Essendon being an average team because they can't do it on a sustained basis. They'll be good one week, poor the next. And that's been emphasised in the last 2 weeks. It was interesting what Brendan Goddard said to us on Thursday. He said they're just an average team because we know the top end's good, but there's too much fluctuation between our best and our worst. That means we are only an average team. And that was emphasised on the weekend. That's great what they did against Port Adelaide, but it means very little if you can only do that twice a month.
Yeah, well, if you're a leader before the game for the Bombers, you're imploring your teammates to be switched on and focused. And I know most players think you are, but as Rocket said, that mental edge just comes down to your starting points and the way you position yourself. Because the previous week against the Doggies, where they gave up 150 marks, you weren't even close enough to be able to stop it. Like you can just say, "Oh, we'll stop marks," but you've actually got to be close enough to be able to cut them out, not tempt them, just cut them out. And they did that against the Power. They only had 68 marks. So 90 marks difference. That's a huge number.
And I think their speed to put pressure on, they really chased and harassed, and you need to bring that every week. That's what won Richmond the final last year. But they were consistent with it the whole season. Now that's up to them to bring it every week, but that's what you need to be able to do. And what I'm looking for in the psychology element is teams that get bagged in the media, they'll bounce back. Essendon have bounced back. A good side will just do that next week and the week after. They may lose, but they'll have that consistency of effort. So if they now have a poor couple of weeks and then get criticised again and bounce back, well, you can be confident of saying that they won't, whether they make finals, but they won't go any good in finals.
And Rocket, who would have thought an All-Australian centre-half-back playing centre-half-back plays well and an All-Australian forward playing forward plays well?
Yeah, it's very rare, isn't it?
Yeah. I was shocked to see that, but even still a little bit of denial, and you take what you want out of press conferences, but Woosha saying, we're still trying to work it out. I think you worked it out, didn't you? The bloke who hooker back, stringer forward.
Well, I mean, I think I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Rocket, that it can't just be that.
No, but it goes a long way.
But, yeah, because I think it was more attitudinal the way Essendon played against Port Adelaide versus the Bulldogs. However, what Hooker does when he goes back is he helps set up the back six.
But it allows Hurley to play his better role.
More attacking role.
So it's a flow-on effect.
And that Hooker can intercept. He's such a good mark. He's not a great kick. So coming out of the back end, where maybe at times there's space because they've pushed up, intercept, and then be able to give it to someone else who's 20 metres away, and they can set the play up.
And I think that was the difference with Essendon yesterday, is that they quickly turn defence into offence because Hooker has the confidence to intercept, but also he gets in very dangerous spots as soon as they turn it over, that he becomes a link man in that transition, and I think he just gets into really good spots, and I think they just looked a completely different team with that the case.
It makes sense to me, Jim, getting players in positions where they play well. It just makes sense to me.
It's not rocket surgery, as they say.
It's not our man Rodney Eade down there. But sometimes, can you try and outsmart yourself, Rocket, to stay ahead of the curve? Is that what sometimes happens, do you reckon?
Oh, certainly as a coach, sometimes you think of... I think probably in John's case, he's probably had a plan over the pre-season. This is the way we're going to go. So you go two way. You think about, well, that's a plan, so you may become stubborn at times. You're really keen to actually prove it right. And then sometimes you probably change things around, maybe add ad nauseum to get something to maybe outsmart yourself. There's probably a bit of both, but as a coach, you're always thinking all the time, what's the best option? And I think you just got to swallow your pride sometimes. That Stringer's never going to be a midfielder. He may go in for 5 minutes here and there, but he just hasn't got the tank, and he parked himself behind the ball in the back 50 to try and get a stat and help defence. But his go is breaking the lines, or as a forward, a power forward, really, to be able to kick a goal. So I think getting that right, Hooker down back looks a lot more solid. And
not necessarily this being an Essendon conversation, but I mean, it happened with the Easton Wood situation at the Bulldogs as well. He was playing forward, then he was straight back after 1 week to defence. Darcy Moore had to go forward for the Magpies after Nathan Buckley had said he's going to be our defender because injuries made it happen during a game, and they needed to win that game. Is part of the reluctance or the pig-headedness at times to not show the players that, I think I might have buggered this up. Is that part of it, do you reckon?
I'm not too sure on that. I think it's always good to tell the players you buggered up.
Yeah.
Because it says that
that
you're in the boat with them, and that's my fault. Okay, take the blame. Let's move on. Let's get something else. So the players know that you're human, because we all make mistakes. There's no drama with that.
Yeah.
I think the Darcy Moore one for me is just a little bit different, because he's still establishing himself as a player. He's still on that big learning curve. The other three that we mentioned have all been All-Australian.
Yes, that's a fair point.
So they've actually been one of the best two players in that position in the game. They're pretty hard to find.
So on the Port Adelaide situation, Rocket, we've focused on Essendon, who had the good win. Is that an issue for Port, or is it as simple as no Patty Ryder means that they can't control stoppages, which is one of their most important parts? If they're winning stoppages with the way they've got their team set up, they're awfully dangerous because they struggled against Brisbane and now they've lost to Essendon.
Yeah. I think Martin last week obviously played exceptionally well. I don't think Bellchambers played that well yesterday, did he?
He was okay.
Okay. And I don't think around stoppages they got smashed. Interesting from a coaching point of view, or I look at the way players run and their intensity, and I didn't see Port Adelaide in those first three quarters have that same ferocity that I saw in the first 2 weeks. I didn't see, especially against Sydney when they beat Sydney. I just thought they were just magnificent. And I didn't see last week's game, but they didn't have the same intensity around the ball, which Essendon had been missing. And that's what you need. That needs to be a standard. That needs to be a non-negotiable week in, week out. If you've got that, then you can coach all the other things. But you just got to have that. And it didn't seem, Wines and Boak and Ebert and these sort of blokes just didn't have what they've had before. And we made a mention before, you can have a non-dominant ruckman or losing the ruck, but you can still win stoppages. You just set up differently. You have a plan, and you know where Bellchambers is going to hit it, or whoever the opposition ruckman. You know what his hit patterns are, as you mentioned before about patterns and where we go. But you can set up, and you can set up some blokes closer to the stoppage or an extra one in the stoppage. Your high forward can go in. You can set your defender. There's a whole range of different things you can do to actually nullify that advantage.
How would you get Tom Rockcliffe going? Because obviously they want him to play more forward. He struggled the first 4 weeks. We know what a great accumulator he is of the ball, but they want him to be, I guess, a lot less of the ball but more damaging.
Looks like he picked up an injury too, doesn't it? I always thought, this is not a criticism because he's been a very good player, I thought it was a strange trade for me because they've got a pretty good midfield. Tom is an accumulator and probably at times as captain that been allowed to play his game. He's tough, but he also got a lot around the back. So to stand up and wasn't super damaging with the ball and the midfield. He's hit the targets but not long. Very good forward. So for him to go to Port as well with a very good midfield, well I think it's a good midfield. He can play Gray in there and Wingard in there, so they've got options. He's not going to be allowed to accumulate. He's going to have to play their way. Does that frustrate him? And then being in forward, is he fighting with Gray and Wingard as well as that smaller forward? So I just didn't think he was going to add to them as much as probably they thought as well. Now, he's probably been carrying an injury in his defence, but I think they'll probably want him more as a forward that can go in the midfield rather than midfielder that can go forward.
Rocket Eade's with us, our Monday analyst on the Breakfast Club.
And also in the Commonwealth Games, for those that think the closing ceremony is sport, it's part of the Commonwealth Games, obviously. Peter Beattie, the Games boss, has come out and apologised for the closing ceremony, and particularly the fact that the athletes were not welcomed into the closing ceremony, into the stadium on television. It was all done beforehand.
Yeah, that was poor. Like it's the Academy Awards, here's one we presented earlier.
That's exactly right.
Stuff.
That's
it was
exactly
no good.
Right.
No good, the Commonwealth Games closing ceremony. And got a good cook from Joe Griggs and Basil last night on Channel 7 as well. If you haven't seen that, just get a look at Joe Griggs' face. You'll know everything you need from that. Rocket, we're going to go back a couple of days to the Friday night footy, Adelaide Collingwood, before we move to some of the other issues from the weekend. Adelaide, obviously, grand finalists last year, but they don't seem to be anywhere near as damaging at the moment. Even though they played a professional game against Essendon last week and got over the line at Etihad, they were mauled by the Magpies pretty much from the start. Yeah,
they were. The Pies were really clean with the ball. Their handball was terrific, and they are handballing more. Because they haven't been a great kicking side. It's marvellous they're getting some confidence from that, and their kicking is improving.
Yeah.
Got some speed at both ends. Young Stevenson, speed in the forward 50. Murray got some speed in the back 50, which they haven't had. But Adelaide to me, I think what I gathered, it was wet, so they prepared for the wet. The rain stopped. They just played down the line. They didn't take any risks. They weren't bold. Collingwood were bold. They changed the angles. They got it out to the fat side consistently and broke it open. But Adelaide just consistently went down the line, played the boundary line. They looked like they were never going to score. And they changed that a little bit in the third quarter. But they're just not the Adelaide of that boldness and being able to get the ball going as quickly as they had in the past.
It's still early. They've only played 4 games and they had a really good win against Richmond at home. But could there be some issues based on losing that grand final just to their confidence and their aura? I mean, we've heard about the camp pre-season and all that sort of business, but they don't look like the same team.
Yeah, I guess probably the 2 games, the grand final, we don't want to keep going back to last year, and then again on Friday night. It's just a few players at the moment. I don't know whether it's a fitness issue for them. They just can't fight their way out of the rut in the game. They've got a few players at the moment who are they're down, sort of early in the game, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's sort of Brendan McCartney. He always didn't pull any punches. If you're not having a good night, don't have an ordinary one.
And that's last night.
Yeah. Because you can still have your effect on the game. If you had a bad 2.5 quarters, your moment could come in the third quarter or the last quarter, and it was a bit like that. And unfortunately for them, on Friday night, it was nearly their whole entire forward half. It just didn't function. And what sides do really well when they beat Adelaide is they keep that defender at home. We spoke about Hawthorn because Lynch gets up high and he makes them go, connect. Well, then Betts and Jenkins get out the back, and sides who defend really well by protecting that back space and keep the Adelaide forwards in front. It forces them, as Rocket said, to kick slow and long down the line.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about this game, but they are missing a few players. Their midfield.
Yeah. So the Crouch boy's out, obviously, is a huge hole.
Yeah, Sloane's got a rock in his shoe.
Yeah, there's a couple of other guys that are injured. So I thought Nathan Buckley coached well. He got Reid to take Taylor out up and wide, so he's sacrificing it. So Taylor has followed him, so it left Stevenson at home with a heap of space. They're obviously changing their forwards, their mids in the forward line. Pendlebury tagged last week with Cripps at a stoppage, or him this week side bottoms and Sloane. So good players on good players. I know Sloane's injured, but I thought there's some good moves.
You've worked closely with Nathan at Collingwood and you've coached against him. Is he coaching as well as you've seen him coach?
I think the last 2 weeks being prepared to actually change things up rather than be, I suppose, and we all do it, we worry about the opposition and this is what we've got to do. I think it's more in a proactive sense. And I think Crisp on Lynch, which is obviously the obvious matchup because Crisp has got a big tank, so he can stick with Lynch as well. Yeah. So those type of things. But Adelaide now with Betts out, looks like he's done a hamstring. So they'll be dragging the chain a bit and actually scraping the barrel. So I'll be interested to see what they do with Sloane. But eventually, if you have enough injuries, it does impact you. I mean, you can be as tough as you like as a team and solid, but eventually, if you've got the talent drain, it does affect you.
And Brody Grundy's performance needs to be spoken about too. I mean, it was unbelievable on Friday. What, he had 33 or something?
Yeah.
33 possessions and dominated as the ruck and the link player as well. He's Peter Moore. That's what he was.
And his height differential with Jacobs is quite pronounced, but his body use he does on every player is fantastic. The other thing that I like about him, generally ruckman will play from the centre circle back to just inside either 50, and they play the corridor. He was going diagonally to the wing, and he was out the fat side. He was running from the back pocket to get out the far wing, and they were using him. So he was a real link person as well. Kicked a lovely goal. So, no great form.
I've got a bit of a theory about him and Sidebottom that they were brilliant last year. Now, he was off the charts on Friday night, but he's been good all year, Brody Grundy. But there was such a fixation with Nathan Buckley last year that there wasn't a lot of focus on actually what was happening out on the field, and I reckon Grundy was close to All-Australian, and Sidebottom's been good for a long time.
Yeah.
But it just seems that they're noticing more the positive things that are happening out on the field because the focus isn't actually on the coach.
His work rate's enormous. Normally when you see sides go the one ruckman, they'll still have the 5-10 minute patch within quarters. But you very rarely see the second, or whoever the pseudo second ruckman is, for Collingwood, do you?
No, you don't.
Well, we talked about this on Friday, didn't we?
But you don't see him.
Yeah.
We talked about this on Friday with when we previewed the game, that Grundy has relished Witt's not being there anymore because he can just ruck.
I think it shows with the ruckman. If you've got 2 ruckmen, you can't share 50-50.
Yeah.
Because both of them get diluted.
Yep.
Ruckmen generally need 80+% because they, like a tractor, they just get into the game. They just trudge along, and eventually they wear down. Because interestingly, Brody, haven't been at Collingwood when he first arrived, his 2K was abhorrent. Like he had no fitness.
That's a good word.
He had no fitness at all. But I think it shows too. That's one thing he can improve in our game more than anything else. They'll eventually, by having some pre-seasons worked out through, he's attitude to doing extras was phenomenal. And eventually, and at 23 years of age, he's nearly the preeminent ruckman in the competition. So
Absolutely.
him, and it's well deserved. What I'm trying to get to is he had some issue, and he's worked his backside off.
But just on that 2K, I was always a horrible 2Ker. So I'm going to defend the guys who are bad at 2K. I reckon there's different types of fitness depending on how you play.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying.
No, but just for people who go, he's...
Come on, mate, don't get touchy, all right?
I'm getting really touchy.
Very sensitive about
Because I nearly wanted to always chin the strength and conditioning guy, just bang, on the chin.
I'm the same, Jim, as a
Yeah.
coach. The bloke who ran 5 seconds faster than someone else, what does it mean?
Yeah.
That doesn't. Or they're always got to be the magic number, whether it's 6:15 or 6:30, or midfielder's got to get a 6:30 and they're running 6:35. Well, does it matter? Doesn't really matter.
As long as you're
But-
improving, Jim.
No,
Doesn't
but
matter
I
what your
did give
number
a
is.
cuddle to the strength and conditioning guy when he found his new little dorky stat where it actually, they called it mechanical work. And it was all that space within the phone box. And if you can keep working there, and that's what Brodie Grundy does really well, you can wear blokes out, that constant change of direction, in that little 5 by 5 metre space.
But I think the thing I was saying on Friday night as well, he's running really well.
Yeah.
He's running through the lines as an extra midfielder, so he's done exceptionally well.
I think we found a chink in the Bartel armour. 2K.
2K.
Put that on file.
2K can get stuffed. If I've had to run 2K to get a kick, I've made some bad decisions along the way.
It's a fair point. Some of these St Kilda players, Whitey, are struggling to get a kick inside 5Ks at the moment.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
I want to ask Rocket about when a team loses complete confidence, which looks like it has happened with St Kilda. They've lost form. And how do you coach them out of that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and been through that as well. So it's more. It's one thing, as I think, first as a coach, to say, well, this is where we're at. We're at ground zero. Don't be delusional about it. Don't try and sell a false message either, because players are smart. They go, well, you're talking garbage. It's then trying to pair it back to basics. I know we all keep going back to basics, but try and get little wins along the way. Little wins along the way about this stat or that stat or contested ball. And eventually, if we do the building blocks well enough, the ordinary things extraordinarily well, we'll chip away and it'll turn into form. It'll turn, and you just got to. That's my belief as an individual and as a team. And you just got to coach on that and try and be positive as possible, as long as there's still education and improvement along the way.
We're being flooded in with text messages, so we're trying to integrate questions from your text messages through this discussion. Because a lot of St Kilda fans are texting in saying they're trying. It's not like they're not trying. They're just going really poorly. So, Jimmy, from your point of view, when you're out on the field and you're seeing guys having a crack, but it's just not working for them, what are you doing as a leader out on the field to try and get some confidence into the group?
Yeah, it's tough because, as you said, if you see the effort there and those KPIs or whatever that you measure your football on, the contested footy's always one, and you're tackling hard, well, then it just becomes a skill execution and where you set up and take the ball. But as Rocket said, you're looking for the little wins, and you've just got to keep narrowing it and making the focus smaller. And it's right. First quarter, that's all we're trying to win. You got to get so small in your goals.
But this is a team that felt that they could contend this year to win the title, and they're where they are now.
Is that serious?
1-3. No, they thought they were
A contender?
a contender in an even competition.
That becomes very delusional, doesn't it? And that's where...
That's what I was saying before.
Yeah, I reckon internally, you've got to be able to have a sense of where you're at. And we all internally, we all overrate a group, whether by a little bit or a lot. We always think they're better than what they are to a degree, but you've got to know where they're at, because then you become disappointed, then become frustrated if expectations are higher than what you're able to deliver.
So, Rocket, with a side like that, the natural inclination for a player is to get very insular and protect your own position.
Yep.
But you don't want them to do that. You want them to play for each other. So then how do you then go to selection meeting during the week and you want to put 3 or 4 out, but then you don't want them to all play for themselves because they're looking after their spot?
It's all about education as a group. This is what we are looking for, as we want players who are prepared to roll off and support their teammate, prepared to sacrifice their game. And as a coach, acknowledge when that happens. So if it's a young kid, 18, well, he'll be playing next week because he's doing A, B and C of what we're asked for. The guys that aren't prepared to do that, try and get those chains off them. to say, well, listen, this is what's required. It's not about the number of kicks you get. It's about how you play to our structures or our defensive model or whatever the case may be, or when they get dropped. And I think this is the big one. It's no good sooking, one, because the only person that suffers is the player. The club's not going to suffer. The team doesn't suffer unless you're a really good player, which you probably don't drop them anyway. But there's no good having the Tom Tits and just because you play poorly because you've cracked it. Well, they certainly won't get back in the next week.
Yeah.
But also give them clear guidelines of what's required for them to get back in. You don't have to be best player. You don't have to get 30 possessions. You do well. You do what you do well, and it may be as a defender, you keep your man goalless and you give us some drive, or you play in front, or whatever the case may be, and you end up with 6 possessions. Well, you'll be back in because that's what you do well, and that's what we want to see. We don't want you to actually go away from what you're good at, and try and get them mentally. And then obviously give them feedback from there.
That's the great art of coaching, getting into the heads of the players. 12-8, Rodney Eade is certainly one of the best that we've come across. And coaching teams who are out of form, I think Brendan Bolton's got some issues at the Blues as well after their performance on the weekend against the Kangas. I don't want to focus on the Blues just at this point because I want to talk about the Kangaroos, Rocket. You've worked with Brad Scott at Collingwood, did you?
No,
you didn't? Missed him? I think he's done a remarkable job with this group. The way the brand of footy they're playing, considering the evolution of this squad and the demographic of this squad, they've been a very consistent conveyance in 2018. What did you expect from them?
I didn't really. I thought if they had their better side, I didn't think everyone was saying they'd probably finish bottom. I still think they'll maybe bottom 6, but maybe 5th or 6th last, whatever that is, 13th, 14th.
But that would be above expectations for most people, wouldn't it?
Very much so. They've got an A-grader in Brown. He's turning now into a really good forward. But I think round 1, if that was played in Melbourne against the Suns, they could, on form now, they could have won that and probably would have won it.
Well, they haven't played water polo too many times, those boys.
Now, they beat St Kilda, and now they've beaten Carlton. So teams in a round where they were supposed to finish, which is what they're expected to do, if they're going to go up the ladder, and then a half a game against Melbourne, they're okay. So I think the better sides will get them, it's probably through talent because they're going youth-wise, but at least they're trying to score goals, they're getting the ball inside. So I think there's a good development plan there.
And the good thing for the Kangaroos, and that's what I noticed when they played Carlton the other night, was when you bring in lots of young players, if you've got some experienced players to help them through, or the young players are asked to play the key roles already for Carlton. When Murphy tripped over the banner or whatever he did to hurt himself before the game, Petrescu, Seaton, these guys are now the big dogs with Cripps inside the bounce. These young defenders, they're the keys forward and back. So they're playing all the key roles. Where you looked at the Kangaroos and they had, Ben Brown, Jared Waite, Goldie, Tarrant, Zeeble, Thompson. Cunnington. So they're experienced guys who 100, 150, 200 game guys. So,
I agree.
So the young players around them, so you've got your Simpkin and that, they can just sort of feel their way through the game. And the Swans do that really well. They bring all this young talent in, but they're not asked to be the big dog at the centre bounce. So
from a big picture perspective, Rocket, just taking this to the Blues conversation quickly, have they thrown too many kids into the pot at the moment? Have they gone too hard in that and then don't have that balance that Jimmy's talking about?
Yeah, I think there's not the balance of not even top-end talent, but guys with enough games. They've got a few blokes they've got from GWS now who have played 40, 50 games who probably aren't the right type of player to, to be in the not in the systems, but to be regular players.
Yeah.
So I think they've got their balance of their squad. They've lost Gibbs.
So Gibbs,
Doherty's
not playing.
Out.
That's obviously
Cruiser, I don't know if he was managed on Saturday night. He was taken off and spent a lot of time on the bench. He missed one game, which was against the Suns. So he's getting to that age where he's probably going to be in and out of the team. They can't rely on it. So, and Murphy is obviously his output's been diluted. He's 31, 32, whatever he is, and he's got injured again. So there's not a lot, A, experience, and B, of top-end talent there. So as Jim said, their young lads are asked to do the major roles. When things go wrong, it's like they haven't got the experience to cope with it. They haven't got people around them who can be a voice in their head or give them direction and lift their spirits up a bit. So, I think they're in a bit of world of pain, to be honest.
So how do their fans get through this then? What's the message that needs to be sold by the club now?
Oh, they've already had the reset. I don't know. Have a reset that resets the reset. I don't know. This is a hard sell now. Because because they've said they've gone for youth, they'll say stay the course. They've just got to say stay the course.
Well, they're just over 2 years into a 5-year sort of plan.
Yeah. So you and maybe the plan there's always a chance to dip first, but then you want to see the graph going up and down a little bit, then up and up to down one type scenario. And you're not. I don't think any one of us are seeing any improvement from last year.
Now you've got to take a leaf out of I know, using another code, the 76ers, the trust the process. And that's what Rocket's been saying. But they've got to keep adding to it, though. And whether they find that, next off-season with some free agents, as we've said, who can give you a year or two and target them.
Why would they want to go to Carlton, though?
Yeah, that's right. They're not going to get them. They're not going to be a house of destination unless nobody else wants them and they can might add experience for a year or two. But
they've got to add the Luke Hodge at Brisbane experience.
But the other thing is the draft picks. Like, they've gone to the draft, but I know everyone in the footy world is talking about Harry Mackay, and he's not ready for AFL footy, but where is he? I mean, is that a bad pick? I know it's too early to judge, but these players need to be playing as well. I mean, if you get top-end talent in the draft and other teams are playing them, I'm not too sure.
No, but with the Harry Mackay, I think he, along with his twin, the one at North Melbourne, with the young Ben, they were the youngest players in the draft, so they almost drafted as 17-year-olds.
Right, okay.
So they treated their first year, I think nearly both clubs did that,
as a development year.
As a development year. So you call it they're in their true, I know it's their third year, but it's like their second year. And Brendan Bolton said, if he's not playing good enough, you can't play him anyway.
No. This is the problem, though, for Carlton and maybe for St Kilda as well, that if you go to the draft over a 2 or 3 year period, that's all well and good. But if you don't select the right players, you actually double down in pain.
Yep.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. You need to get if you go to the draft, you need to get your selections right. I've got no problem. I heard Paul Roos saying it's a flawed approach. I don't think it's a flawed approach. That if you're going to go to the draft, and there's been plenty of examples of people getting it right. Clarkson did it initially when he went to Hawthorn.
Yep.
People forget about that, and Roos, didn't mention that, and he got Buddy, and he got Ruffhead, he got Lewis, and that set their base of going forward. Then they ended up getting Mitchell. So going to the draft is not a flawed process. You just got to, whatever plan and strategy you have, it can be the other way too. You just got to execute and you've got to get it right.
Well, during my years at Geelong, I think there was only Brad Ottens and Cam Mooney who got brought in from other clubs. It was 2 big drafts where we took 8 plus a couple of rookies.
And Geelong and Hawthorn both did it. In 2 drafts, they got the core of their premierships.
But what I can only speak of Geelong side. We just spent hours and hours in development. So the development coaching, that's the other part. You can draft all the kids you want in the world, but you've got to develop them really well.
I just get a feeling, Rocket, that there are clubs out there. There's 2 big issues in AFL football. The fact that the Bulldogs and Richmond have won the last 2 premierships, there's other clubs that go, well, it's my turn. There's almost this feeling that it's going to be them.
Entitlement.
Yeah, yes. and that, oh, well, if they did it from 11th or 9th or whatever, we can do it. And the other thing is that, oh, we'll just go to the draft and that'll solve all our problems. And it doesn't just work that way.
No, it doesn't.
And I think there's an element of complacency. Oh, we've got all these good first-round picks. It'll just happen.
It needs to be a planned approach, and the planned approach is just not 12 months out. You need, obviously, list management, you're probably doing 5-year blocks. And where are our holes, 1, and 2, if we're going to win a premiership, what type of player do we need? A, at the draft, and B, trading. But it's just not going to turn up. And you need to get your selections right. So you need to draft, okay, and you need to probably pluck one at pick 30 or 40, as Geelong did at the time, and end up being a really good player. If you've got early draft picks, there's no guarantee, but you need to get those selections right. And if that fails, as far as the planned approach, it doesn't mean that the plan's wrong. It might be the execution's wrong. It's also, too, that we don't want to bottom out. But Sydney have drafted well. They've got a lot of rookies that have come up. So they've got a lot of kids. So their kids have turned out okay. They've done exceptionally well, and probably their development and their system that they've got coming into. So you can't say that they've just got people from other clubs. They, except for Franklin. With Franklin coming, they can't get players from other clubs. They've got no money in the salary cap.
You see half that with Sydney, that these players come in like a Hayward or a Florent or these sorts of players that they might have only played 5 or 6 games, but you already see them as, oh, they play the Sydney way. Yep. It's almost like it's been ingrained in them from you know, that you're not going to get a game unless you play the Sydney way.
But they're asked to play the periphery roles first.
That's right.
And that was my point with Carlton and North Melbourne the other night.
It's a good point. It's a good discussion. And it's great to have access to Rodney Eade as part of our analysis of 2018 on the Breakfast Club Rocket. We appreciate your time. Look forward to catching up with you next Monday.
Thanks, guys.